Hello and welcome to the Writer's Workshop here at One-to-One Schoolhouse. Today's topic is how to spice up your writing using alliteration. Though I'm oversimplifying a bit here, most writing aims to accomplish one or more of three basic objectives: to inform, to persuade, and to entertain. And I don't mean entertainment like you'd see at a circus with clowns racing tricycles or poodles walking tightropes. Instead, I'm talking about engaging your reader by providing moments of something like recognition, something like delight. This is the same sort of delight we have when we notice something unusual, or get somebody's allusion to something, or even the punchline to a joke. And that's because people look for, maybe even crave, patterns: dinner at 6 o'clock every evening, a bedtime story every night, and the same menu at Thanksgiving every year. Now, why do you as a writer need to know this? Well, for thousands of years, speakers and writers have used repetition as a way to connect with their audiences, to help them remember something important, to highlight something useful, to call them to action, or just to amuse them. So in talking about alliteration and how to use it, we'll begin by defining it, talk about why a writer or speaker would use it, point out its intended effects, and give you some examples of how it's been used in literature and in nonfiction writing such as newspaper columns or magazine features. Last, we'll walk you through an exercise in which you'll get a chance to write sentences of your own using alliteration so that you get a little practice. So as a literary device, alliteration is one of dozens of figures of repetition that good writers use to make their writing effective. So under that broad category of repetition, alliteration falls under the subcategory of repetition of letters, syllables, and sounds. In other words, the smallest units of language that we can repeat. So put simply, to define it, alliteration is the repetition of the same letter or sound within nearby words. You're probably used to this in your study of poetry, but it's most often repeated initial consonants. So look at this slide. If you were asked to quickly describe what's being pictured in the bottom right-hand corner, you might say, well, two dogs. But to describe the scene as featuring a doggy duo reveals a much higher bit of writer's craft, and that's what we're after today: better, more engaging writing. The most common form of simple alliteration is known as head rhyme, meaning the sounds that play together occur at the beginnings of words. And in addition to usually featuring consonants, these sounds are also usually composed of accented syllables. So let's talk about alliteration's effects. So alliteration is deliberately used for the sake of melody. In other words, your listener or reader will find something pleasing in detecting, even if it's barely detectable, a sound pattern or rhythm in your choice of words. They'll hear that the letters and syllables sound good when you put them together. Now, generally, when you create a first draft of an essay or article or speech, your objective is to lay out the essential information you want your audience to receive. And once you've put your message on paper or on a computer and arranged it in the most logical, most effective way you can think of, you'll begin to focus in later drafts on less on what you're saying and more on how you're saying it. This is where things like diction or word choice and syntax or word order come into play. Now, in addition to figuring out what letters and syllables will chime off of each other, you'll need to decide what types of sounds to use based on the situation or the subject of your writing. So if you look at the previous slide that I'm going to flip to now, there at the bottom right-hand corner, and on this slide, we've got some sleeping babies. Now, for the same reason you probably wouldn't ask Alexa to play a medley of AC/DC's greatest hits when having a candlelit dinner with your sweetie, unless, of course, you're Attila the Hun and are eating roast goat with your tribal bride outside a village you've just torched. When choosing the words you'll use, you'll want them to match your subject. So if I want to use alliteration to describe the sleeping child here, I'll go with smooth-sounding letters and syllables: slumbering Sarah. Now, how about if we look at some examples of alliteration that have been used in literature? The first here is the opening line from William Shakespeare's Sonnet 12, "When I do count the clock that tells the time." All right, did you hear that? I'll say it again more slowly. "When I do count the clock that tells the time." So here the repetition of the K and T sounds along with that line's crisp iambic meter evoke the auditory image of a ticking clock. This is intentional, okay? Shakespeare meant to do this. He had a plan in mind when he wrote the opening to the poem, just as this sonnet about time is placed 12th, as in to correspond with the numbers on the face of a clock from the period, in the sequence of 154 sonnets first published in 1609. By the same token, Sonnet 60, the seconds in a minute, is also about time. All right, so how about a more recent example? Red Smith, you see pictured at the top there, known, by the way, as the Shakespeare of the press box, was an American sports writer whose work as a reporter and columnist for the New York Herald Tribune spanned about 5 decades. He was also the second sports writer ever to win a Pulitzer Prize. This was in 1976 under the category of Distinguished Commentary. So listen to the following sentence from a piece that Smith wrote about the legendary baseball pitcher Jerome Dizzy Dean. The busher was putting more people in the park than anybody else, including Ruth, who had never helped the Cardinals draw a dollar. So just listen again to all the sounds that are playing together in this near symphonic harmony. The busher was putting more people in the park than anybody else, including Ruth, who had never helped the Cardinals draw a dollar. And this profusion of plosives, sounds that you're forcing air out of your mouth, in particular evoke this sense of stammering disbelief that a country boy, a rube like Dizzy Dean, could draw crowds even larger than the mythic Babe Ruth, the Bambino. All right, so let's practice. So probably hit pause, grab something to write with, or maybe you can use your computer, and you're going to write an alliterative sentence that creates an image of an exhausted runner crossing a finish line. All right, so you can look at the picture, or you can call up a memory of having been near a finish line at a cross-country race or a road race or something of that nature. But before you begin to write, think about the things you may want to capture in the sentence. All right, sure, you'll want to tell your reader about the guy sort of lurching toward the line in this end of race fatigue state, but maybe if you apply some of what alliteration aims to do, you'll think about the sounds you'd hear at or near the finish line of a foot race. Then you'll maybe want to include those sounds in the words you use to describe the scene. So, what sound should you use? So if you want to evoke an image of, and again, we're talking about an auditory image of heavy breathing, you might use H sounds or short U, like the sound. How about feet striking the ground? So if you're on asphalt in a road race or something, you might use D sounds and B sounds. If you're at a cross-country race on gravel where, say, the competitors have spikes on, you might use K sounds and S sounds to get that ticking sound of the spikes against gravel. If you want to capture the sense of exclamations of despair or exhaustion or fatigue, you might use sort of the long O sounds, the long E sounds, this sort of thing, in order to capture that idea. So, I think what you'll find if you take time to listen and look is just how often writers and speakers use alliteration in their work. And if you want your writing to really stand out, you'll start using alliteration in your work too. And of course, if you want to learn more about how to spice up your writing, feel free to reach out to us here at One-to-One Schoolhouse. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.